Now, before you take the infection control examination, I will give you a review for the examination, which will guarantee you 100 on the infection control. I guarantee it, okay? This is one time when I can guarantee you 100 on the infection control examination. And you'll see why tomorrow. Also, half of the infection control we had already in class this semester, so I can blow that right away. And, when do you take this exam? What day do you take exam 3?
Monday. So tomorrow we have infection control and exam 2, and then a week from tomorrow we have exam 3.
Exam 3. So you got a week, so what'd you want this now for? You could have slept, and I could have done it with you next week sometime.
It was just easier to get the approval through Karen.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay. We started this with control of microorganisms, remember? We talked about physical and chemical control, and we talked about and stuff that you learned during the semester, like cysts and spores and things like that, which make everything difficult. You should know the definitions of disinfection, sterilization, antisepsis, sanitation, and degerm. Remember, antisepsis is the removal of microorganisms, and antiseptic is used on inanimate objects. And betadine is what? A disinfectant is used on inanimate objects, and betadine is used on the skin. That's an antiseptic. So antiseptics are used on skin. Remember that? Betadine is an antiseptic. So when we talk about disinfect, you take away infection. If it's on an inanimate object like pine sol, Lysol, it's a disinfectant. If it's on skin, it's an antiseptic. I told you about that. The autoclave, I told you about the autoclave. 121 degrees centigrade, 15 pounds per square inch, remember? And the only way you're going to get sterilization is by steam autoclave. You're not going to get it any other way. The closest thing to it is using glutaraldehyde in chemical disinfection, but there's nothing like steam autoclave kills spores. We talked about what's the fastest way to kill a microorganism. I know it's real early in the morning and you still have your sleep set on and you want to go back to bed right after I do this, but some of your brain should be awake right now. So what's the fastest way to kill a microorganism? Like Jeopardy.
Is it heat?
Is what?
Heat.
Give me more than that. Small word. Come on, quick. You said it partly. Yeah, heat kills the microorganism. What am I talking about especially?
The autoclave?
The fastest way. The fastest way.
Incineration. Is it incineration?
Incineration. Burn it. Absolutely. Good for you. See, you're not that asleep, then. Good for you. Your mind work. Did you have your coffee yet?
I did not.
You did not. Oh, boy, you're good, boy. Without coffee to come up with incineration. Good for you. I bought my wife a T-shirt that says, "I drink coffee for your protection." Is that true for you, too? Yeah? All right. Remember, anytime you're going to heat something, you're going to destroy proteins. Just think about it. With any question you get, even on the board, you throw 2 eggs in a pot, and what happens to the protein in the eggs? What happens to the egg white? They coagulate. So if you always remember that, you'll always remember that anytime we're using heat on anything, depending upon what the question is, you're going to destroy the nucleic acid. So if you'll always remember that, you'll always remember there's some way that we're going to destroy it. All right? Ultraviolet light, I told you about. Remember, ultraviolet light forms adjacent thymine molecules to crimp on one side of the ladder. So you have the side of the ladder here like this, and adjacent thymine molecules on this side crimp, and all of a sudden it pulls everything with it, and that's the end of the microorganism. So we talked about ultraviolet light. We talked about the microwave. How does the microwave work? Remember? Well, you turn it on, you plug it in, yeah. I told you, never cook anything in a microwave. Never, 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 not even coffee. And if you're going to heat coffee up, put a saucer on top of that cup. She never will. But how does it cook? It cooks, remember, by the heat of friction. It sends high-speed water molecules into high-speed motion, and they bang off each other, creating the heat of friction. Remember that? No? Yes? Maybe? You're going to autoclave something today? I mean, you're going to use your microwave today? How many times a day do you use a microwave? Think about it. How many times a day do you actually use a microwave? Once, twice, 3 times? No. Twice, yeah. Twice. I'm really good at thawing stuff out with the microwave. I'm really good at that. So when my wife takes something out of the freezer that's rock solid, I like to do it by weight. I can weigh the object like 1 pound, 1.5 pounds, and I can set the microwave for defrost. And they're so good. If you set it to the time, it's like as fresh as can be without cooking anything. If you really know how to do that. And I love it that way, because you never leave anything out on the counter overnight or anything like that to thaw out, because you know that's dangerous. So if you know how to use a microwave, you take something frozen out of the freezer, and in 11 to 12 minutes, it's like new, and then you can cook it fresh if you start a little earlier for supper. Okay, we talked about ultrasonic vibration, where you send bubbles through the water, and the bubble boom bursts and vibrations through and kills the bacteria. We talked about jewelry, cleaning up jewelry like that, toothbrushes and stuff. Dentists use it in your mouth. We talked about fractional sterilization. Remember, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 temporization of fractional sterilization. Oh, we talked about, silver nitrate. Remember, we're doing chemicals now. We talked about silver nitrate and what it can do. We talked about, what epidemic, pandemic, endemic, pathogenicity, acute, chronic, communicable, contagious. Period of incubation, period of prodromal symptoms, period of disease or acne, period of convalescence periods, biofilms. We talk all about how do you make a T cell and how do you make a B cell. Remember, B cells make plasma cells make antibodies. B cells do not make antibodies. Plasma cells make antibodies. The T cells turn on the B cells also. Remember, clonal selection occurs when the clonal selection begins when the antigen encounters the T cell. Remember that? Then the whole thing starts. T cells start. We know about cytotoxic T cell. We know about perforin. We know about natural killer cells. Know about major histocompatibility complex. Know about outbreak, memory cells, reservoir, fomite, vertical and horizontal transmission. Anytime you see a question on my exam or on a board exam that has one of the answers is hand washing, regardless of what the question says, that's the answer. And sometimes people say, you see it twice. They say, they wouldn't put hand washing twice on the exam because that's wasting the question. No, they would. They would. They would. I won't, but they would. I told you about the what herd immunity is. Passive immunity, active immunity, naturally and artificially acquired, passive and active immunity. Remember the little chart I gave you? Antigen, antibody. I told you about DiGeorge syndrome and Bruton's A gamma globulinemia.
Sorry, can
Severe combined immunodeficiency disease. Yes, go ahead.
what were those
Yes,
last?
you're gonna say, huh?
Those last.
Bruton's A gamma globulinemia, B for B cell. Remember B for Bruton. Then you got to remember that the DiGeorge is the T cell, and severe combined means the lack of B cells with T cell. Yes, that your question? Good. Okay. Know about the role of the macrophage. Know about antigen presenting cells. I gave you 3. I gave you the macrophage. I gave you dendritic cells, and I gave you B cells that are all antigen presenting cells. Remember, once the macrophage eats up the bad guy and presents it in the MHC, it becomes an APC, an antigen presenting cell. Once it gets to the lymph node, the T cell attaches to the MHC of the macrophage, that becomes a committed T cell. Then the clonal selection, all of a sudden, the T cells start to get manufactured cytotoxic T cells and stimulate the B cells. Remember the diagram? Yeah, so names like that. And interleukin 1 and interleukin 2 and what they stimulate. Look, it's all on that pretty diagram you have in there. Okay, complement. Okay, complement. Wait. I'm trying to gear you into some of the questions. Anytime you see anything happening in the skin, it's got to be T cell. It's got to be probably cytotoxic T cell. If I asked you, why do you have graft? Why do you grafts don't work? Graft rejection. Why? Because all of a sudden, remember, the graft is non-self and you're self. And you recognize the graft as non-self. What's going to recognize the graft? What's going to destroy the actual anastomosis? Is going to be cytotoxic T cells that are going to get in there and destroy the anastomosis, whether it be the kidney or the heart, unless you can block it. So everything, I just want you to gear yourself in, even on the boards. Anytime you see something happening in tissues, it's got to be T cells. It's got to be cytotoxic T cells. And always keep that in mind, even on the boards. Because if it takes place in the blood, the humoral immunity, something like that, it's got to be B cells. But in tissues, particularly for rejection, and I've seen several questions like that, they're looking at cytotoxic T cells. The primary, the immune response in an adult, how long does it take? There was a slide somewhere on that, but that I was going to throw that in maybe to see. How long does it take approximately to start to build up? About 7 days, about a week, remember? Takes about a week. Well, let's see. Ooh. All right, type 1, 2, 3, 4. The different types of allergic reactions in type 1, systemic anaphylaxis or urticaria, IgE, and remember, mast cells and basophils. And the first time you come in contact with an allergen, you are sensitized. You will only have the reaction the second time you come in contact with the allergen. Know a little bit, about what characterizes type 1, type 2, type 3, what's the Arthur's phenomenon, what's hemolytic disease in a newborn, poison ivy. What would that be? That's good. Type 4 hypersensitivity is the longest around. It takes 24 to 48 hours. That's a perfect example of your tuberculin sensitivity test. That induration, that's all T cell. That induration in the arm, it's all T cell. Look at that. I give you the MAN2 test. I give it to you under the skin. I'm giving you it's a perfect example. I'm giving you a tuberculosis bacteria under the skin. And there's going to be an immune response to it. And if it's under the skin, it's got to be T cells. Cytotoxic T cells, you see? Caroline, you're making me hungry. What are you eating?
I'm eating a turtle.
Oh, that's good. My wife baked the yogurt cake, and I'm dying to get into it later. What natural killer cells are? Remember, they go after viruses. Remember, they attach to the MHC. They secrete perforin. Remember about complement, I told you? All about complement. See what the classic pathway 1, 2, 4 gives you 3. C3A, C3B, the C5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is the attack complex. A or B, inflammation or opsonization. I think you ought to know that. Inflammation, rubor, calor, tumor, dolor. Inflammation. Cytokines. What are cytokines? Cytokines. The voices of the cell. Isn't that a nice thing? Talk about the cytokines, the voices of the cell. They sing for your health. And you should love the tune. Okay. What is a superantigen? Oh, we've been there. Superantigens. We talked about vaccines. We talked about whole unit vaccines, subunit vaccines, pieces of the vaccine. And we talked about DNA vaccine. And I mean, look at the perfect example of what's going on. You didn't get it, but I made a PowerPoint of how you make a viral vaccine. And I made the mistake of, I was in Tuesday after your class, I was in I go into the Montreal polio Zoom, not because it's in Canada or anything, but there are more Americans in it than Canadians, and we have anything goes in there. So it's an uncontrolled fun for 2 hours. We have a great time. And a group leader said, in fact, I wrote a paper for them on coronavirus, and they published it in French in Montreal. How do you like that? But they asked me where I'm working on something, and I said to them, working on a PowerPoint. And she said, oh, you do it here. I said, it's not made for non-science majors. Well, make it for not, show it does. So I doctored it up, and I showed it to them last Tuesday, and they loved it. Yeah, loads of questions and everything. So too bad we don't have time. But what I'll do is on Monday after infection control, I don't know if you have another class, but if you don't or anything, if you wanted to stay, whoever want to stay, I could show you the PowerPoint on the cell lines and how they make vaccines and stuff. It was kind of cool. Let's see. Yeah, Bruton's A gamma globule anemia. Boy, can you say that with one sentence? And your teeth don't fall out? Bruton's A gamma globule anemia? Wow. Okay, let's see. We talked about a little bit about AIDS, and we talked about reverse transcriptase. That has to turn DNA to RNA. We talked about AIDS. It's what else can we tell you? Retrovirus. We talked about the drugs used in AIDS, the combination drugs, HAART. That's good. Allografts, autographs. Always remember something. The fastest way to deal with the problem is give them the antibody. Just remember what I'm telling you. Remember that. Give them the antibody, because the antibody, you have no time to give them the actual bacteria. If you had tetanus, all of a sudden you think you have tetanus. If I give you the tetanus bacteria, by the time, and you've never seen tetanus before, and you have no memory cells, by the time the tetanus bacteria allows you to make up antibodies, you could die from tetanus. So the fastest way of dealing with any problem immediately is give them the antibody. Remember that. Give them the antibody. Passive immunity, very important. Interferon. Talk a little bit about interferon. Remember, the first response you're going to get in this whole immunology is inflammation. Remember, that's the first thing. Inflammation. Inflammation then gets the phagocytes there. The phagocyte eat up the bad guy. Take a piece of it and present it in the MHC. Then it becomes an antigen-presenting cell. Then it's going to go to a lymph node and match with the corresponding cell. So the actual very important first part of the immune response is inflammation. That's what's killing all the COVID people. Remember I told you that it's not. What am I trying to think of? It's the beta hemolytic strep. When we talked about this post-streptococcus sequelae, and I told you about everything that happens in the heart, in the kidney, in the joints, and I say it's not the bacteria, it's the immune response with the bacteria that's so strong that it destroys everything. Well, pretty much like this, all right? Stuff like that happens. Interferon, all right? Inflammation, yes. Again, C3, C5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is the attack complex. What is a toll-like receptor?